Hello, my name's Lex, and this is my entry to the 2021 Christmas ghost story calendar, which has got multiple names, so I'm not sure exactly what we're calling this. You might have seen a few of these floating around by now, so just to introduce what this is, I came up with the idea of bringing back the Christmas tradition of people telling ghost stories, but rather than telling one of your own, I got a bunch of horror writers together who would each read a story by a different horror writer. So person A reads a story by writer B, and writer B reads one by writer C, and so forth until you end up at the back at the start again with someone reading a story by the very first reader. So as you can see, I'm joined by Butters here, who's decided she wants to be a part of this. I've also got Faith, but she's just quiet. So the story I'm going to be reading is by Allen Gunnell, who is a very good writer and a lovely chap. I would recommend looking up his work if you haven't already. I'm reading his story 911, which was published in his collection Ghosts in the Attic. So I'm just going to start that for you now. Becky kicked her shoes off as soon as she was inside the door, dropping heavily onto the sofa without even bothering to remove her blue Walmart smock. She was so exhausted she had entered that semi-delirious state where nothing seemed quite real, as if she were experiencing everything in a dream. Her bedroom, only a short distance down the hallway, seemed an infinite number of miles away, and she didn't think she had the strength to make the trek. She thought she might just curl up on the sofa and hibernate until next spring. Across the room, she could see her answering machine flashing at her, red and angry. Whatever messages awaited could only be from her mother, phone salesmen, or bill collectors. No one else called her. She wasn't in the mood to hear from any of them. She had unplugged the phone from the wall and, as if right on cue, her phone began to ring, its trilling jangle driving into her brain like an assault. The cordless was on the table by the sofa, and she could read the caller ID without moving. It was her mother, which was only to be expected. Becky briefly considered letting it go to the machine again, but images of her mother showing up at her doorstep convinced her to answer the phone. Hi, Mom. Rebecca and Skylar, I've been calling you for hours. Why haven't you picked up? I just got home. I haven't even had a chance to check my messages yet. Where in heaven have you been? Working. Where else? I thought you were on the morning shift today. I was, but we've had a lot of workers out with the flu right now, so I ended up having to pull a double shift. Oh, Becky, honey, you shouldn't be killing yourself at that job like you do. Mom, I'm fine, really, Becky said, although in truth she was so weary that holding the phone to her ear seemed quite a chore. Besides, I could use the money. Silence from the other end for a moment. Becky knew what was coming next. Wished she could think of some way to stop it, but in the end she just had to let it come. Becky, don't you think this has gone on long enough? Mom, please, I really don't feel like getting into this right now. But baby, you have a college degree in communications. You shouldn't be working such a menial job. It's beneath you. Look, I'm tired. I'm gonna go. I'm not saying you have to go back to being a 911 operator, her mum persisted, but there are plenty of options available to you. The terrorist attack on September 11th was nearly a decade ago. It's time you moved on. The rest of the country has. I told you I didn't want to get into this, Mom. How many times must we have the same conversation? Until I get through to you. I know it was a tragedy. We all felt it, especially here in New York. And I know it was horrible being on the phone with that man when he died, but Kyle. What? That man had a name. It was Kyle Covington. And I was the last person he ever spoke to before he died. More silence from the other end. Then, Becky, how long are you going to go on mourning a man you never even met? Mom, I need to get some sleep, Becky said, then hung up before her mother could respond. She held the phone in her lap for a few moments, expecting her mother to call back. When the phone didn't ring again, she placed it back in its cradle, then turned to the man sitting on the other end of the sofa. Long time no see. Kyle Covington smiled wanly at her. He was dressed in a grey suit with a blue and white polka dots tie, as he always was. So how long has it been since the last time I was here? 3 weeks, give or take a day or two. Funny, to me it seems like only a second ago we were in the kitchen chatting. Becky nodded, but said nothing. This wasn't the first time she and Kyle had this conversation, but they never came up with any answers. Kyle had no idea where he went when he wasn't here, and he always came back, sometimes within a matter of days, other times longer. The longest he'd gone without popping up was 3 months. Becky had dared to hope that she'd seen the last of him. Then one morning she stepped out of the shower to find him sitting on the toilet seat. So that was your mother on the phone, I take it? Kyle asked. Yeah, she thinks I need to put 9/11 behind me. I guess that's a lot easier to do if I wasn't always hanging around, huh? Again, Becky said nothing. They both knew the answer to that one. I don't mean to be here, Kyle said, fiddling with the knot in his tie like a man who wasn't dead. I don't really seem to have a choice in the matter. Why me? I mean, it's not like we really knew each other. I spent 15 minutes on the phone with you, that's it. Yeah, but it was the last 15 minutes of my life. I'm just guessing here, I don't exactly have a rule book or anything, but it's like you said to your mother. You were the last person I spoke to before I died. You were actually on the line with me when the tower collapsed. That kind of creates a bond between us that goes deeper than mere flesh or blood friendship. Well, I imagine I'm the last person you want to be bonded with for eternity. I remember that day. You seemed more annoyed with me than anything else. I was under a lot of stress, as you know, Kyle said with a dry, humourless laugh. You kept forgetting my name. That's what I remember. I must have given it to you half a dozen times, and then I screamed at you to pay attention. Well, I'll certainly never forget your name now. Shortly after 9/11, even before Kyle made his first appearance in Becky's life, she'd done some research on the man. At the time of his death, he was 2 weeks shy of his 41st birthday, working for an accounting firm on the 107th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, had never been married and had no children. He'd been late to work that Tuesday morning, but not late enough to save his life. He called 911 and had been connected to Becky at 10:14 a.m. I didn't have anyone to call to say goodbye to, said Kyle. My folks were dead, and my lover and I had broken up about 6 months before, so I had no one to call and say goodbye. But I didn't want to be alone. That's why I ended up on the line with you. I know. And she did. They'd been through all this before, but when you spend several years with a ghost who had no life, literally, and you had no life figuratively, you sort of ran out of things to talk about. They had a few regular scripts they ran through, and this was one of them. You know, I contacted your ex-lover, Cedric, about a year after it happened. He said he'd never stopped loving you and he wished you'd call him that morning. He would have loved to have heard your voice one last time. Kyle snorted a laugh. Easy for him to say with me being dead and all. Trust me, if I'd survived, he'd have been singing an entirely different tune. But it's just like him to play up the drama of my death for his own benefit. You know, you could always go haunt him. I've still got his address somewhere. If only I could, then I wouldn't have to keep bothering such a nice lady as you. Becky suddenly felt tears very close to the surface, and Kyle's image wavered and blurred. She blinked, and he came back into sharp focus. He wasn't transparent or pale or any of the things she believed a ghost should look like. He was there, not in the flesh, but as solid looking as the furniture in her small apartment. I lied to you, she said softly. What? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Becky unburdened. In all those years I've never told you this, but I lied to you that day. I kept telling you help was on the way, that rescue workers were making their way up to you, but I didn't believe it even as I was saying it. The South Tower had already fallen at that point. I knew that rescue workers in the North Tower were trying to get out before the inevitable collapse of that one as well. I was talking to you, knowing that you would never make it out of that building. And then when it happened, I could actually hear the building falling down around you. A loud rumble, not like thunder, but more like a freight train. And then you screamed, Lord save me, please, I don't want to... And that was it. The line went dead and you were gone. Just as I knew would happen, but I kept telling you help was on the way. What were you supposed to say? Yelled Dead Man walking into the phone. I didn't want to die in there, that's for sure, but by the time I dialed 911 I didn't have many illusions about my chances. You did what you had to do to try to keep me calm. I don't hold any grudges about that. They sat in silence for several minutes, nothing but the sound of a TV playing in the apartment next door filling the emptiness. Then, speaking so suddenly it startled Becky, Kyle said, There's something I've never told you as well. Becky wasn't sure that she wanted to hear this ghost secret, but she was too tired to protest, so she just waited for him to tell her. I didn't die right away. When the building started to fall, it wasn't instantaneous or everything. I was probably conscious for only another half a minute, but it felt like forever as I was bounced around like a pinball. I could hear my own bones breaking, and it sounded loud even amidst all the crashing and screaming around me. There was pain and fear and then nothing until I found myself with you that first time. Becky closed her eyes, her chest feeling like it was about to implode. She didn't need to hear that, didn't want to know it, and she wished Kyle hadn't told her. Without opening her eyes, she said, her voice quavering, Are you going to haunt me forever? I wish I could tell you, but I really don't know. Becky leaned towards Kyle, her eyes shining with intensity and more than a bit of desperation. Don't you see a bright light or a tunnel or a relative waving at you or anything like that? Kyle shook his head and stared down at his lap, looking almost ashamed. Sorry, nothing like that. There's just this, just me here with you. Wiping tears from her cheeks, Becky got to her feet. I need to get to bed. Then without looking back, she went down the short hallway and turned left into the bathroom. Exhausted as she was, she knew she'd never get to sleep without a little help. As was the case most nights, she'd open her medicine cabinet and pulled out one of the many bottles of sleeping pills that crowded the shelves. Popping 2 of the pills, washing them down with lukewarm water from the tap, she headed for her bedroom. As she crossed her hall, she glanced back towards the living room. It was empty, but she didn't doubt that Kyle would be back. He always came back. And that's the end of it. There is also a little note here from Mark at the end of the story, which I'm going to read because I think it sums things up quite nicely. He says, 911. I never thought I'd write a 9/11 story. The event just seemed too big for me to encapsulate in a single tale, and I figured there wasn't really anything I could say on the subject that hadn't already been said. Then one day I got to musing about the 911 operators who had actually been on the phone with victims when they died. How did it feel to know you were the last person someone spoke to, that you were in fact talking to the person at the moment of his or her death? So that sort of thing has to haunt you the rest of your life. At that point, I became almost obsessed with writing this story, poring over old video footage from that day. It was almost painful to write, and I probably don't have another 9/11 story in me, but I am pleased with the result. And so you should be, Mark, because that was really special. Especially this is the 20th anniversary of that event happening. So yeah, that was Mark Allen Gunnell's story. Please go and look up his work, including the one that this is published in, because he's a very talented writer, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the rest of them. And I hope you enjoyed this. So stay tuned to the other stories from the other authors reading these, and thank you very much.